How many of you have had to replace your EGR that you remember?
No, not yet.
A couple? How many of you replaced the MAF that you remember?
No.
Just a couple of you still? Okay, so these aren't real hot items for you? They're about to be, because most of you who have not had to replace your EGR or your MAF, the EGR specifically, the reason you're not replacing it is probably because it's not being asked to open at all. Your EGR command value is probably stuck at 6%. I had this situation with my van several years ago when Mike and I were just starting out making videos. I've got two vans, and my van, my Pride and Joy van, didn't have the same power as its twin that was a year older with more miles at the time. So I kept troubleshooting. We found the EGR value was always stuck at 6%. And eventually Mike found a way to fix that by resetting adaptive intake air adaptive values in our ECM. Over the years, what I've learned is that as our MAF dies, our van adapts to its value. The mass airflow gives a lesser response through the mass airflow sensor, or the amount of air flowing through gives a lesser response, and our computer adapts to that and says, okay, we've still got sufficient air, just our voltage or our frequency isn't as strong, but we can adapt to that. So it adapts, and then it keeps adapting and keeps adapting, and eventually somebody will put a new MAF in it, and now it's looking for signals down here on the range, and all of a sudden it's getting signals way up here on the range, and says, oh, that's too far out of range, I can't adjust to that, so I'll just shut it down and lock at 6%. And we pretty much don't notice, because this has happened to our van gradually over time. As the MAF has gotten dirty, it's gotten weaker and weaker acceleration just a little bit. It's not near as bad as limp mode, but if you've got two identical vans and you're driving them both alternating days, you're going to know the difference. If you've only got one van and you're stuck at 6% EGR, you probably don't even know. Any good code reader that's compatible will tell you what your EGR live value is. And if you're stuck at 6% and you're happy with the power you're getting out of your van, leave it alone. I should back up a little bit. The T1N recall, who knows what that is? Anybody read about T1N recall? No? It's a recall all of our vans probably should have had at some point, because our mass airflow sensor can die without turning on the dash light to notify the driver. And that's a violation of EPA. Now, if our mass airflow value, or if our EGR doesn't open, our van can emit too much NOx emissions, and that's a violation of EPA, blah, blah, blah. Not a big deal, nobody cares. A lot of people go about it the hard way and delete their EGR with programming, maybe even a blocking plate. And if you're in that situation where your EGR is stuck at 6%, you effectively have a deleted EGR, but you didn't commit any crimes to do it. There was no intent, so you're kind of lucky. You might want to leave it alone. Myself, I want that extra power, I want that cleaner emissions, I want my van running right, so I fixed it by resetting the intake adaptive values. In order to do that, we need DAS, Diagnostic Assistance Software. A lot of us call it dealership automotive software, kind of the same thing. It's the software the dealerships pay in the ballpark of $6,000 a year to use this software. It's readily available online in hacked versions for $300 to $400, $500. Some full sets, you can get a laptop and a little box adapter that makes the laptop connect to the van. Uh-oh, where'd it go? I just had one here. There it is. Where did the red one go? Anyhow, this is what they've come up with recently. It's just a USB adapter instead of a whole bulky block. Thank you. Whoops, got it. So just a USB adapter to your van, to your USB port. And I intended to show you how much easier it is to work on the tablet instead of a laptop, but my tablets won't power up. We've got one in the van getting charged right now. Apparently when they're off, they're not really off. So it was in standby the whole time and died while we were on the way here, and I didn't know. Checking out the new tablet DAS. I went in to read it, and it's showing some values here, but they're different from what I've seen before, so I wanted to record that before I continue on. F2. Switch ignition off. We can go in here and manipulate that mass airflow sensor or intake adaptive values, get them reset back to zeros. And then right away when you start driving the van, it's probably going to drive sluggish and you think, oh my God, what did I do? Your engine is adapting to the new values and it'll take some time. And in my experience the first time, I've told this story several times, I refer to it as the giggle drive, because we did this in the driveway at home, took it for a test drive, and well, hell, my van still sucks. Okay, no big deal. We'll keep looking for solutions. Didn't find anything. A couple days later, I took the van on a longer drive, heading up to Jacksonville, about 100 miles from home. 50 miles up the road, I'm like, oh, something's different. When I step on the gas, I really feel it going. By the time I got off the interstate that day, I was giggling because my van was driving like I hadn't felt in years. All of a sudden, it was not just as good as my other one, my number 2 van, but it was better. It had horsepower like I remembered when it was new. All because of that math, the EGR command value, which is dependent on the math values, and apparently the O2 sensor. When I started looking into this more recently, I discovered my van had the trouble again. So I want to do the same thing that Mike and I had done years ago. The math or the DAS software that we had bought years ago had expired. So I bought a new one, discovered can't do it with the new software. Took a while to find the right version of software. And it's like 1 in 10. But once I started playing around with the vans in my yard, which were several, we found that 3 out of the 5 vans in my yard were stuck at 6%. The other 2, the EGR value was fluctuating fine. And nobody knew we had a problem with any of the vans, other than I was kind of suspicious I was losing power on mine again, but I'm blaming it on everything else. I've swapped engines, got bigger tires, all of that. So got it reset, and right away noticed the difference. The van's driving terrible. 10 miles later, it's starting to drive good, and sure enough, I've got good power again. So yes, this is a confirmed working solution to give you more power, better emissions, and a little bit better fuel mileage for most of us. And I will be able to send this to you, just this little setup. It's a whole lot easier than the old DAS setup with a computer and a brick and charging, and step-by-step instructions. 2 ways of doing it. You can watch my video and follow along, or turn it on, connect it to a Wi-Fi, text me, and let me do the button pushing remotely. Either way, we'll get your system reset, take it for a drive, and hopefully you'll have exciting results and giggle your way home like I did. If you need this reset done, your EGR is never asked to open, except on shutdown. It will always do a cleaning cycle on shutdown, and we've got a video on that too, showing how to do that, checking the EGR. Unfortunately, what we learned after doing that video is that cleaning cycle test doesn't reveal if your EGR is ever used. You can go through the cleaning cycle and your EGR looks fine. Put it all back together, take it for a drive, and the EGR is never asked to open. So it's still not doing anything. Yeah. I think what's happening is because of the O2 sensor and the math sensor values, our engine is essentially tuning itself down so that the combustions are never hot enough to ask or for there to be reason for the EGR to open. Does anybody know what the EGR's main purpose is?
Yeah.
Recirculate gas, but why?
Burn pollutants.
To cool the combustion temperatures.
By removing oxygen.
By removing oxygen. Displace oxygen to cool the combustion, and thereby lower NOx. If our fuel air mix has been tuned down enough by the computer that our combustions aren't hot enough to ever ask the EGR to open, we're just kind of getting weak power, but not dramatically. Not enough to really, stand out in the crowd. The resistor trick. Anybody familiar with the resistor trick? You've heard of it? If the resistor trick works for you.
For people that don't know, can you explain
Yes.
the resistor trick?
There's a common YouTube video out there that implies you can do an EGR delete yourself at home. Just unplug your EGR and stick a resistor in it. They give a specific ohms rating. I think there's even a link to where to get that resistor.
It looks like a little tiny sausage, 2 little wires sticking off each end, and you just bend the wires down and plug it into the plug that comes out, that goes into the EGR valve. Put some tape over it, and you're set. You're great.
You're gravy. The resistor is only telling the computer that the EGR is there. It's not telling it that it's working. It's just telling it that it's there. And if you don't have a resistor or you have a cooked EGR plugged in, you're going to get codes as soon as you turn the key on.
Right.
With that resistor in place, your van will run fine until the ECM asks the EGR to open. As soon as it says, oh, O2 sensor says we're running a little too hot here on the combustions, right? When your ECM tells the EGR to open up, it's looking for a change in that mass airflow value. And if it doesn't see a change, it's going to kick a code and say, hey, our EGR is not working.
Actually, So
And that's part of, it might say the math is part of it.
the math it says there's an error in the math.
And I was just getting to that. That's part of why our EGR and math codes are always so confusing. We can get a math code because we have an EGR problem.
Right.
We can also get an EGR code because we have a math problem. So one of those codes, as I tell people all the time, codes are clues, not diagnosis. A code won't tell you what part to replace. A code tells you what part to look at.
Or what system do we get?
What system to look at? Yeah, but it absolutely does change the mass airflow when the EGR opens, and that would be a good way for it to trigger. Hence, the resistor works until the resistor trick or resistor hack works until your EGR is asked to open. So if anybody's running a resistor in your van, don't do this process because you're immediately going to need a new EGR. To find out if this reset will do you any good at all, just check your EGR value. You need a good code reader, compatible code reader, so you can monitor the live data. EGR value should fluctuate with your throttle. If it's always at 5% or 6%, it's stuck. And then you need this reset done. Or I'm going to put need in quotes, because if you're happy with the power and economy that you're getting and happy with not ever having to replace your EGR, don't do this reset. I don't see, so far I'm not really finding any major negative aspects to needing this reset done other than slightly reduced power.